I'm Chris Post, Boys Latin's headmaster. It's a pleasure to have you here with us for a conversation with Catherine Price. The format of tonight's gathering is formally informal. How's that? I was trying to describe this to a couple of our students, and they sort of looked at me like, what if I said it's like a discussion mullet? It's like business in the front and then more informal in the back. Sorry, it's a boys' school thing. Anyway, it's wonderful to have you here tonight. What I thought I would do would be to get a sense of the room a little bit. This is also the first portion of audience participation, okay? So if you have a son who is a student here at Boys Latin, would you please stand? Terrific, thank you. Good to see you. If your son is a student here at Boys Latin and he's in the lower school, would you please stand? Thank you. If you have a son in the middle school here at Boys Latin, would you please stand? Thank you. God bless you. Middle school is a special age. And if you have a son here at Boys Latin and he's in the upper school, would you please stand? As you all know better than anyone, the ages of 15 to 18 have absolutely no challenges whatsoever. I'm not even sure why you're here. If you have a child at another independent school, would you please stand? Welcome, it's great to have you. If you have a son, would you remain standing? If you have a daughter, would you please stand? And if you have a child at a public school or local parochial school, would you please stand? Thank you for being with us tonight. Our speaker, Catherine Price, is hailed by the New York Times as the Marie Kondo of brains. In a future session, you can do some tidying up here, okay? Catherine is an award-winning science journalist and speaker whose work has been featured in media outlets around the world, from the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal to NPR and the BBC. She's also the author of books including How to Break Up with Your Phone, the 30-Day Plan to Take Back Your Life, and The Power of Fun, How to Feel Alive Again, which is the inspiration behind her TED Talk about fun, which has been viewed more than 5 million times. Just a few million times more than our open house video was recently. Her ultimate goal is to help people, including herself, scroll less and live more. How to Break Up with Your Phone has been published in more than 35 countries and featured in scores of high-profile media outlets around the world, including in a viral New York Times article written by technology journalist Kevin Roose. The Power of Fun was chosen by The Independent as the best-selling self-help book of 2022 and led to Catherine leading a class about joy for Oprah Winfrey. I should have just begun and ended the introduction right there. Catherine also writes the popular How to Feel Alive Substack newsletter, which combines evidence-backed suggestions and ideas with personal stories of her attempts to put her own advice into action. A graduate of Yale University undergraduate and the University of California, Berkeley graduate degree in the School of Journalism. Catherine is also an alumna of Trinity School in New York, K through 12 independent school in the city. Please join me in welcoming Catherine Price. So what's not included in your bio is that your career began as a boys' school educator. When we connected earlier this summer, you shared with me that some of your early experiences were as a tutor and then later instructor at the Buckley School in New York, teaching boys. Thinking back to those students and the students that you encounter today, what remains constant and what are the greatest differences?
Well, first of all, thank you for that introduction, and more importantly, thank you everyone for taking time out of your Tuesday to be here for this mullet, which I love. I love that idea.
It's a discussion mullet.
It's a discussion mullet. And yes, so the most important thing to know about me, I think, in reference to this conversation, is I have a 9-year-old daughter myself, and so I had written How to Break Up with Your Phone for myself personally to spend less time on my phone when I was around my daughter. But it's become even more personal now that she is in a combined 4th and 5th grade class. And so I've gotten very involved in talking more to schools and parents about kids and phones, and actually have teaming up with John Haidt. I'm sure many of you have read The Anxious Generation, which we can talk more about. We should also say we have a lot of time at the end for questions and answers, so think of some while we're talking. And the most exciting news in my life recently is I'm actually writing the children's edition of The Anxious Generation with John. So I'm happy to answer. Don't clap yet, guys. We don't know. It's like, I've got to go back to the hotel and tomorrow morning start working on the outline, so perhaps we could use some of this as fodder. But
we can workshop it.
We can workshop it. We'll workshop it. But yes, one of my favorite professional experiences was getting to teach Latin and math at the Buckley School for Boys for 6th through 8th graders, who were the kids whom I was teaching. And it's really very funny to be back here. I mean, back in the context of a boys' education. So Chris was asking some of the differences I see now between kids now and those kids. And I was reflecting back on that experience at Buckley. And it's funny because I remember only one time that technology got in the way. By the way, are you guys hearing a ring? I'm not sure. Okay, I don't know if there's anything to do about that. If anyone has advice. But there was only one time I can remember technology actually interfering with the teaching. And it was the day when Buckley lost heat, and it was in the middle of the winter in Manhattan, and it was, literally freezing outside. And I remember this kid named Ross, and I still remember who it was, and he had a sweatshirt on, and I could tell he was, he had his headphones on underneath that, probably for his iPod at that point. But that was the only time, and he was just trying to be, naughty. It was not surprising given who Ross was, and it wasn't really a problem. But I was reflecting on how much has changed since then, and if you just think about the technological changes that have happened since then, I taught in 2002 and 2003, and the first iPhone was only introduced in 2007. We didn't really have any social media platforms other than Friendster, if anyone remembers that. And Facebook was just starting to get going, but in the early days, it wasn't around then, but you couldn't join without an edu email address. You didn't have Snapchat, you didn't have Instagram, you didn't have TikTok, you didn't obviously have any of the AI tools. So that's MySpace. Yeah, I guess we did have, but there's no way to carry those technologies into the classroom other than the iPod. So that's just amazing, I think, to reflect on how much has changed just in those years. And the other thing I was thinking about is that we have had a huge change in the mental health of students since then. And I pulled up, so part of our discussional mullet, is that I have some slides that we're going to work into our discussion that I may or may not gracefully switch between. But one thing I think is really striking is this slide from the CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And this is showing high school students who agree with the following statements. And it shows you 2011, which obviously is nearly 10 years after I was teaching, or more than 10 years since I was teaching, and where we are today, or where we were in 2021. And you can see on this chart the direction things are going, which is not good. I particularly am struck by the top one about the percentage of students experiencing persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, and how much that has increased. Obviously, the suicide statistics are alarming as well. And there's a lot of different theories for what may be causing that, but the one that we're obviously here to talk with you about tonight is the one proposed by John in The Anxious Generation. And just in case you haven't read that book, his hypothesis is that there was just a huge change that happened between 2010 and 2015, where, in his words, we shifted from a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood. And in that time, which is like 5 years, social patterns, role models, emotions, physical activity, and even sleep patterns were fundamentally recast for adolescents. And his prescription is to basically exchange the phone-based childhood for a more play-based childhood. And I can say I was really excited to talk to Chris when we were doing our preliminary call, because it seems like that's exactly what you're doing, both in terms of phones and then also play, which actually I would say is something I don't see as much with schools doing that as much yet, is the play side. So, kudos to you. Like the playground you were describing is entirely in line with.
We might talk about that
Yeah.
in a little bit. And really, it's kudos to our lower school staff, who I think has really embraced that. So
Nice.
Middle school as well. So your book, How to Break Up with Your Phone, suggests a perhaps less than healthy relationship that students and we adults might have with screen-based technology, sort of like that first bad middle school relationship that you had, but you just can't get away from it. What is it about these devices that create such distractions, if not dependency issues, for kids and adults alike?
Right, so one thing I like to emphasize whenever I talk about kids and phones is that we adults are not doing particularly well. I always like to ask adults if you think you're really killing it in your own relationship with your devices. And I already see people shaking their head, no, you're not killing it, okay. And that's what motivated me to write How to Break Up With Your Phone, as I was mentioning, was my desire to actually change myself. And I think we need to keep that in mind when we talk about our kids and technology, because I think we do need to be aware of and address our own relationships with our devices before we can model behavior for our kids and try to give them guidelines, because why would they trust our guidance if they can look at us and we're on our phones all the time? And what I always try to really educate people about, especially teenagers when I speak directly to teenagers, is just that this is how the apps have been designed, and it's deliberate, and the manipulation is being done by very, very smart people who are profiting based on the amount of time that we and our children spend on their apps. When I give non-mullet talks about this, I like to incorporate videos from tech executives themselves speaking about their own products, because I think that's even more effective than me telling you things. So we have a couple of those. So I wanted to show you a few in response to this question. And the first one is from Sean Parker, who was the first president of Facebook. And he was speaking at a 2017 event in Philadelphia for Axios. And here's what he had to say about the thought process behind the apps that, as you may know, Facebook became Meta, and Meta owns Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. So he's speaking about the early days of Facebook in particular, but it applies to all the social media platforms.
If the thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them to really understand it, that thought process was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And that means that we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever. And that's going to get you to contribute more content, and that's going to get you, more likes and comments. I mean, it's a social validation feedback loop that it's like, if the thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them to really understand it, that thought process was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And that means that we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever. And that's going to get you to contribute more content, and that's going to get you, more likes and comments. I mean, it's a social validation feedback loop that it's like it's exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. And I think that the inventors, creators, and it's me, it's Mark, it's the Kevin Systrom at Instagram, it's all of these people understood this consciously, and we did it anyway.
I always feel bad stopping on that still, because he looks very evil. Yeah, well, he's since used some of his fortune to fund cancer research. So I want to apologize to Sean Parker where that ends. But the point he's making is that this was very, very deliberate, and the design choices that he and his colleagues made were deliberately chosen to get us and our kids to spend more time on the platform. So in How to Break Up With Your Phone, I go through some of those dopamine triggers as he's talking about, the tricks that are built into our phones to basically hack our brains, to use the tech exec's own terminology, to get us to keep checking compulsively. And it's worth noting that anything that we adults are vulnerable to, our children are particularly vulnerable to, because of the stage of brain development they're in. And I'm happy to talk more about that if you'd like. But the result of all of these tricks that they've been using is really quite striking. There's a woman named Anna Lemke who's a professor at Stanford, and she wrote a book called Dopamine Nation that some of you may have read, where she actually calls the smartphone the modern day hypodermic needle. Technically, smartphone use is not yet classified as an addiction by the American Psychiatric Association. I personally think it's kind of a matter of time. But it is actually interesting, because even the Psychiatric Association itself has quotes like this, where they actually say that children and adolescents are particularly vulnerable because their brains are still developing. The results of these tricks that they're doing are really quite striking when you start to add up the time. And I personally hadn't internalized these numbers until I began to write and research about this. But the most recent stats that I have are that 62% of people ages 18 to 29 are online almost constantly. The teens report spending more than 7 hours a day on screen-based leisure time that's not schoolwork. So another reason to be grateful for the policy that you have here, where you're protecting 7 to 8 hours a day. But for kids whose schools are not restricting phone use, these are the statistics. The average American teen is spending about 5 hours a day on social media. And then if you talk about adults, 57% of Americans describe themselves as being, quote, addicted in their own terms. And I wanted to kind of zoom in on teenagers in particular with social media to just help you all internalize like the sheer amount of time here, because I personally think one of the biggest issues here is opportunity cost. We can have debates about particular academic studies about social media and the effects on mental health, but I don't think it's really worth getting into those weeds if you just step back and say the amount of time that we're spending on these platforms is outrageous. And as we all know, if you spend time on one thing, you can't spend it on something else. So if you think about the fact that, in this case, this is Gen Z on social media, there's 62% of respondents were spending more than 3 hours a day, or actually more than 4 hours a day on social media. And you do the math on that, I didn't even go up to 7 hours a day because that seems so extreme. But for any of us, it adds up to an amazing amount of time. The average adult, the best stats I found for adults is about 4 hours a day just on phones. And that's about a quarter of your waking life. I mean, it's really a lot of time. I also should note, I have a resource page for you all. So most of these slides are on it. So you feel free to take pictures, but I also know some of you checked your phones. But just know I've taken notes for you so that you don't have to worry about it. And then the result of that is that there's just, if I go into some of the effects, some of the things that are being kept from us. Actually, you know what? Ask the next part of your question because I want to get into that. I'm going to pause for a second because I think you're talking about schools who are being accused of, yeah.
So first off, can you hear us better in the back now? We'll do a better job of holding these.
Sorry, I wasn't sure
us.
if it was going to do that thing. Just raise your hand because I obviously want you to be able to hear what we're saying.
So we talked a little bit about the primary motivation for exploring this topic and ultimately writing both How to Break Up with Your Phone and The Power of Fun. I was struck by the former Facebook's president's comment that they were deliberately, and so this is comments that were made in 2017.
Yeah, those are 2017.
Right. So long before the experience of, like, let's say the last 5 years, that they deliberately established a social validation feedback loop that was designed to manipulate the end user. It's not at all nefarious sounding whatsoever. So those of you who did register by email, we'll make sure we get you the resource page. So you mentioned that here at Boys Latin, our full faculty and staff read Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation last spring when it came out, and it really mobilized our team to take a look at our practice. I think it affirmed a lot of the things that we do, but also led us to make some changes. There's more unstructured play in the lower and the middle school. There's a corner of our playground, which you might look at in the morning and say, God, that's a junkyard. But no, it's our creativity corner. Old tires, PVC piping, pallets, and supervised but unstructured play by the boys. What could possibly go wrong? We've also established a really clear expectation that we've had in place for our K to 8, but that our upper school students will have their devices away for the day. And so they check in with an advisor first thing in the morning, their phone goes into the box, and they pick it up at the end of the day. And I think we as a school went public with this probably early August, and had a conversation with families, many of you who were here about a month ago, and we thank you for your continued engagement in this, and have found that it's been, the community's been incredibly receptive to all of this. That having been said, one of the critiques could be that we can't bury our head in the sand about the use of technology. What do you think about that?
Well, Chris, I think that people who don't recognize the benefits of what you're doing are actually burying their heads in the sand. And I got kind of worked up when Chris mentioned he might ask that question because I think it's just people would, I understand, because many people have not thought about this, and a lot of the things that have been saturating my life for the past however many years it's been, like, are not actually things people think about all the time. And so I understand that people have not really been educated about these issues, but if you dive in, there's so much stuff that's known by the tech companies themselves about what they're doing and the effects that their products are having. And there's so many issues that school districts are facing. And so I have a couple examples for you. One is that there's just a huge number of lawsuits against the social media companies in particular. It's hard to keep slides up to date, honestly, in this topic because every week there's something new. So some of the ones I'm about to show you, I just added today because my husband sent me he's an attorney, just sent me this opinion that was issued last week. Yeah, just under a week ago. That's in regards to one of the big multi-district litigations from school districts against social media companies about their products. And so I wanted to pull out a couple things that I did not know until last week when I was reading through this. Don't worry about reading this one, but this is a list of all of the alleged harms that the school districts are saying that social media has had upon them in terms of, in many cases, the financial impact, which was really interesting, I thought, about the amount of money they're having to spend to deal with mental health problems that they have not seen before, and also just to deal with kids' resources. But I mean, the fact that this goes up to S, that's a lot of different, they probably should have just gone to Z while they were at it, but it's a really an amazing list of issues that schools have been forced to deal with. On K up there, it says 41% of public schools added staff to focus on student mental health. I mean, really kind of dramatic increases in the need to help kids with their mental health since the advent of social media. And I wanted to pull out a couple things. I did not know this. This was brand new to me, about some of the things that the social media companies have done to target schools in particular. And again, I mean, I started thinking about this issue in 2016, and I did not know this. So there's efforts by the social media companies to deliberately try to penetrate schools because they recognize that if they can get kids to use social media in school, then they're going to have bigger market share and they're going to make more money, which is really repulsive to me. This is one thing from Instagram that I wanted to pull out, talking about how Meta has noted that winning schools is the way to win with teens because an individual teen's engagement is highly correlated with the school's monthly active person penetration. That's how they talk about your children. The teen team talked about how to study this penetration and noted their capability to tell when teens open the app at school and geolocate which high school they go to. And then it says that Instagram has actually partnered with the National PTA and Scholastic to, quote, integrate their Parents Guide and Instagram programming into the 500 back-to-school nights across the country, thus having the ripple effect of reaching out to 20,000 classrooms across the U.S. and 250,000 teachers. So that's their kind of approach to this. So when you see Mark Zuckerberg or these executives kind of, I don't know, apologizing to the public about some things, just know that behind the scenes, this is what is happening. And I pulled out a couple because I know there's obviously multiple platforms that our kids use. This is another one from Instagram that is just talking about how the goal of Instagram was to get the parents to say that their kids really loved Instagram. And one thing that really got me is in the middle section, it says that they note that getting critical mass in a high school very quickly, e.g. in the same afternoon, is extremely important. And one way to do this was a hacky way to use push notifications from their Instagram account. So basically, Instagram says we want to learn as much as we can from these high school tests about what levers we have for driving teen engagement. So it goes on. They've got examples from Snapchat where a teacher was talking about a Snapchat update that came out and the impact that it had on their classroom. And the teacher explained that in 16 years of teaching, I can't think of anything that has ever disrupted my classroom more than today's Snapchat update. The teacher explained during class, kids were so focused on updating their Snapchat, quote, you would have thought it was crack. They seriously could not keep away from it. I even had one girl crawl under the table with her phone. So that's upsetting to me. And then this, just to give background on what I'm about to show you, there was a different lawsuit that was filed against TikTok. I don't know if anyone saw this. This was actually just a week and a half ago also, another slide that I just added, where there was a big lawsuit against TikTok, and the lawsuit was redacted. But then in Kentucky, it was multiple states, the Kentucky version got leaked, an unredacted version, and NPR got a hold of it and wrote this very long article that I recommend reading. But it had some revelations from TikTok that, again, I personally was shocked by, even after thinking about this for so long. So this is from the lawsuit. I think we need to be cognizant of what TikTok use might mean for other opportunities. And when we're talking about opportunity costs for kids, When I say other opportunities, I literally mean sleep and eating and moving around the room and looking at someone in the eye. And that is actually a direct quote from a TikTok executive in the lawsuit. And then their own research, this one really got me, that TikTok states is that compulsive usage correlates with a slew of negative mental health effects like loss of analytical skills, memory formation, contextual thinking, conversational depth, empathy, and increased anxiety. So again, in the context of, the school's putting their head in the sand by not realizing they need to have technology in the classroom, this is what we need to be aware of. And some people are aware of it. As you may know, the Surgeon General of the United States, Vivek Murthy, who's amazing, he actually called for there to be a warning on social media platforms in the same way that there are cigarette labels. He actually had a whole advisory last May of 2023, about social media. And then this summer came out with this. And then I also wanted to play you one more clip from Sean Parker, just talking about their awareness of how the platforms were actually do interfere with the values that many of us have, both as adults, like for ourselves, and also as parents for our children. So this is Sean Parker again.
When Facebook was getting going, I had these people who would come up to me and they would say, I'm not on social media. And I would say, okay. You will be. And then they would say, no, I value my real life interactions. I value the moment. I value presence, and I value intimacy. And I would say, well, you're a conscientious objector. That's okay. You don't have to participate, but we'll get you eventually. and like, I don't know if I really understood the consequences of what I was saying. Because the unintended consequences of a network when it grows to 1 billion or 2 billion people, and it literally changes your relationship with society, with each other, with it probably interferes with productivity in weird ways. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains.
And again, 2017.
2017,
right?
yeah.
God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains.
And then the TikTok comment that was leaked last week saying they know exactly what it's doing to our children's brains, and loss of analytical skills and ability to think deeply. Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned notifications and sort of what that does or what it was targeted to do. There's a story that has been circulated a lot here at Boys Latin about the first week of school. A young man in the first week went back to his advisory. He picked up his phone and he said to his advisor, or said to his classmates in the advisory, oh my God, it's like 235 notifications. Am I getting that right? 240 notifications? And immediately, I think we thought that he would have immediately started to scroll through his phone. And instead, he threw his phone back down on the table, he sat down, and he just had a conversation with his classmates. I think what we found is that the boys have appreciated our leadership saying, trust us, it's better for you, and it's better for us from a learning perspective and just from a human interaction perspective to have the phone away from the day and, learn to treat it with, maybe some of the fear and respect that it's due. So with that in mind, how and in what ways can schools teach students to balance the appropriate use of their devices?
Well, I think the first thing to do is what you are doing, which is to create a phone-free environment at school, and really importantly, not just during class. I think that, I know there's a lot of schools who are adopting phone-free policies, various different types of phone-free policies, and there's debate between whether it should just be in class or if it should be for the whole school day. So I want to come down strongly on the side of the whole school day, which is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And the reason being is that, while of course maybe not of course, people are waking up to the fact that these things are incredibly distracting and that you're not going to be able to learn as well if you're getting 240 notifications or whatever during the school day. What is less talked about is that it is these interstitial moments between classes where you have these face-to-face human interactions, where you have the chance for eye contact and conversation that the other quote from TikTok was saying, where you develop friendships and you learn how to navigate awkwardness and do scary things like, talk to an adult or ask someone out or do, whatever it might be, instead of retreating into your device. So, and also having the opportunity for unstructured play. So I think it's absolutely essential that schools adopt phone-free policies, and I think that you're taking wonderful steps. I mean, you have taken that step to do that. And I did want to highlight a couple of tools, though, that might be useful for people who are from other schools. Because I saw, thank you for doing all that standing up, by the way. That was like an aerobics class. I didn't have to stand up at all during that. But just a couple of things. So first, there's a ton of schools that are doing this, and so many schools are reporting this amazing transformation when they do go phone free. One thing I've heard, and I know we talked about this earlier, is that the level of noise that ensues when you ban phones. And to me, this is really quite moving. And I've heard from so many people that when they banned phones, the cafeteria got so loud. And I remember I was telling you.
Our head of upper school suggested giving the boys back their phones just to quiet them down. I'm kidding.
Yeah. No, but people have said they thought there were fights breaking out. But in fact, it was just kids engaging with each other. And then in a really depressing one, I spoke to has anyone heard of Yonder, the company that makes the pouches that a lot of schools and concerts are using? The founder of that company.
Do any of your children who go to other schools, those schools use Yonder pouches? Just.
I teach at
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Great.
So the head of that company is a wonderful man who's very philosophical and is coming at this from all the right. I mean, he's amazing, but he was saying they do a lot of research about what happens before and after Yonder pouches are used, and they actually help with the rollout. They don't just give the school the pouches and then walk away. They actually have people help them. But he was saying another thing that he heard was that students are eating more because they're not just that they're not scrolling through the phones, but they're not worried about being filmed, which is just, the kind of thing you never would think of, at least at my age, where that wasn't a thing. But anyway, going to the question of
that definitely didn't stop me in the cafeteria growing up, I can assure you.
Maybe someone should pull out a phone. No, I'm kidding. But also, if it's useful for anyone, I just helped John Haidt, our team, made these phone-free school toolkits for administrators, parents, and educators. And through this page, and again, I have this on the resource page. The resource page is just my name, katherineprice.com/resources. So I'll put it up, but hopefully that's relatively easy. Anyway, there's a really wonderful school administrator toolkit that a different organization called the Phone Free Schools Movement put together, that if anyone needs like a step-by-step, how do we do this guide, it's the best one I've seen. It's really wonderful. And then I'd also say for teachers in the classroom, I think the next frontier is ed tech. Phones are one thing, but then what about the laptops? What about the iPads? What about all the learning apps? Which is tricky because in some cases, teachers really like them. So I wanted to highlight two things. One is that there is a really useful tool from everyschool.org called the EdTech Triangle that was designed, research-based, to help educators and administrators evaluate which technology is worth keeping in the classroom and which technologies are not worth keeping, basically dividing it into these categories, almost like a food pyramid, where if it's truly transformative and it's really helping the students gain a skill or do something they couldn't do without technology that truly is valuable, we'll keep that. But if there's an analog alternative, or if it's just straight up distracting, then you should consider getting rid of it. And the woman one of the people behind everyschool.org just wrote a post for John's Substack, which I highly recommend subscribing to. It's excellent, which is called After Babel, about the device-based education, the ed tech issue. And I'd really recommend checking that out if you want a nuanced discussion about what aspects of educational technology might be worth rethinking now that we're kind of realizing that the mass adoption of these technologies might not have been a great idea. And again, in many cases because the tech companies were trying to get their products into schools. Google Classroom is free, right? There's a reason. I think we need to keep that in mind for all these things. Anything that's free, we're actually not the customers.
So what we've set here at Boys Latin, a pretty clear expectation of 7-hour phone-free experience. It's safe to assume that the same practice can't happen for kids and for families outside. So what are a couple of steps that you think parents could take to encourage healthier relationships with their devices, both for their children and for themselves when they're not on campus?
So I literally wrote a book about this. So I was trying to figure out how we can encapsulate this. And I think I do have a lot of slides for this one, and then it'll be more informal. But I have a lot of suggestions on that front. I always like to try to give people practical suggestions. When I'm giving a more traditional lecture, I often have a slide that has a map of the emotional journey of the evening, where it's, you start in kind of vague discontent and worry, and then I bring everybody into a pit of despair, which I don't think we've actually gone into. So that's good.
There's no despair here at Boys Latin. I want to be really clear about that. So no, that's right.
I read your motto. It's not in there. So
that's right.
Anyway, but then
to be rather than to seem and to despair. Yes.
But as a side note, when we first met, I love that motto because I thought it fit with the theme of tonight so well, with social media in particular, the way that we're kind of being conditioned to treat ourselves as performances, where you're seeming to be a certain way, but who are you actually? So that really resonated with me. But I'd like to give people practical suggestions so that you're not just kind of like, great, I went to this talk and she freaked me out, and then I got into this pit, and now I'm home alone and I'm sad and
With my
anxious.
phone, but I don't want to look at it.
Doom scrolling, right? That's not what we want. So I got some resources and ideas for you. First, some books. The one on the left is mine, so I think it's pretty good. But you should definitely read John's. I mentioned that we're coming out with a children's book, which, by the way, the reason I'm freaking out about that is it's supposed to come out in September. So just if it does come out in September, I'd love for you all to just remember this moment right now, and just send me thoughts that like
your edition or your version of the Anxious Generation
Yes,
for
for
children
kids, and it's gonna be
is
for-
due in September.
No, it's coming out in September.
Well, it's coming out in September. Would you like a place in our no homework study hall
Yes.
in order to get your work done? Let us know.
I used to monitor the study halls at Buckley, so I know how much, yeah. Anyway, but I genuinely hope it will be very practical, and the goal of that is going to be to help inoculate kids so that hopefully they become less attracted to these things themselves because they better understand the forces that are out there to manipulate or working to manipulate them. And that is supposed to be for a target audience of fifth graders, but a bit on either side. The other one I wanted to call to your attention, because obviously many of you have sons, is this book, Kids, Brains, and Screens, because I'm thinking that probably a lot of you have kids who play video games, and that gaming might be a challenge for a lot of people. This is a book written by a woman named Melanie Hempy, who started an organization called Screen Strong. So Screen Strong, highly recommend checking that out. This book is a curriculum of sorts that goes through understanding your own brain and then understanding why your brain is so susceptible to some of these forces. But Melanie herself, her son was genuinely addicted to video games to the point that he was not leaving his college dorm room. She actually thought he had a drug problem, but then he said, no, Mom, it's not drugs, it's video games. And she started this organization called Screen Strong. This book is actually quite expensive because it's self-published. But so if that's prohibitive, there's actually an excellent set of resources on screenstrong.org. She's got all sorts of different classes and handouts and just things. So I really recommend checking that out if you have issues with games in particular. But then in general, my guidelines that I recommend to people, they're similar to John Haidt's guidelines, which is that if you have a kid who does not yet have a smartphone, we really should be trying to delay these things. Smartphone and social media. I know that games are kind of it's not quite as clear cut with games, but I believe in these guidelines. The reason I personally think that it would be better to delay smartphones a little longer is that once you give your kid a smartphone, you are giving them access to everything else. And it's not just social media, it's the whole internet. It's everything on the internet. It's, porn, frankly. It's like all these things that are not appropriate for kids of that age. So it's just kind of easier if you were able to delay a bit longer. And you might be thinking that's really hard, and you're right, because we are in the middle of a collective action problem, which is basically the idea that we might know what's right as a group, but individually it's really hard because at the moment, the status quo is that kids are getting smartphones at very young ages. And if your kid is saying, I'm feeling left out because all my friends have a smartphone, well, they're right, because currently they do. And that's where parents do need to step up and hopefully work with our kids, but we do need to take a stand. And this slide is just showing that in the beginning of a collective action problem, when there's only a few people taking action, there genuinely is harm that comes from that. That's the dip underneath the x-axis there. But I'm here to tell you, on an optimistic note, we truly are getting past that trapped feeling where so many people and so many schools and so many parents, so many governments are taking action on this. There's huge momentum. And I've seen that happen just since March when John's book first came out. So it's really amazing. There's a lot of movement, but I want to empower you. And then just to give you a couple of suggestions that I give people is that when it does become necessary to give your kid a phone, to start with just a basic loaner phone. It doesn't need to belong to anyone in particular, but it can be a flip phone. It can be, it doesn't matter which one it is really, but something where it's not my phone per se, it's a family phone, and just lend it out to your kid when you need to be able to be in touch with them because they're at a play date or a sports game, whatever. When you do have a kid who's old enough where you're considering a smartphone, I'd recommend a smartphone alternative. So basically like a smartphone, but with training wheels, something that helps kids get ready to so going to your question about, don't have your head in the sand. Obviously, our kids are eventually going to have smartphones in the same way that our kids are eventually going to drive cars, but it would be kind of dumb to hand your 8-year-old the car keys. We have a whole system in place to teach kids how to drive. Is it 100% safe when they get their driver's license? No, and the same thing, the internet won't be, but there's a system. So there's a lot of these. I have these on the resource page. There's probably even more. These are some that people have recommended to me, and then I actually have a bunch of the samples. I'm totally agnostic as to which one you use. They all have different features, but the biggest thing is that none of them have unfettered internet access. In fact, most of them don't have any internet browsers, and they don't allow social media, and the apps that you can download, if you can download apps on them, are very, very limited. So I'd recommend checking those out, and I've written about them on my Substack too. There's a guide to them. It's very...
Really quickly before you move on,
yeah.
one of the things that I think is interesting is in the lower left-hand corner is a picture of a Garmin phone or a Garmin watch. You've seen these before? So we had an experience with the upper school recently where students were going outside for some unstructured play during community time. And I guess they all looked at each other and went, oh man, who's got a watch? Right? None of them wear watches anymore. And so our school store manager has bought stock in Timex as a result. No, I'm kidding. But our 24-year-old was home, teach up at Phillips Andover up in Massachusetts, and came home and had a new piece of jewelry that was a Garmin watch, and talked about just how wearing that is an effort to eliminate some of the distraction and distractedness that comes from carrying your smartphone, and the smartphone stays away. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Well, it's funny you say that, because you're making me think I should have a slide that's just about get your kid a normal watch, because I have type 1 diabetes and I have an insulin pump and it has a clock on it. So I just look at my pancreas when I need to see the time. And then I also have a Withings watch, which is very analog. It technically tracks my steps, but it doesn't really, I guess you could get text messages, but it's like a news ticker, and I don't want text messages on my wrist, so I just don't do that. But I should do that, because it makes sense. You should get your kid an alarm clock, and you should get them a watch, like a basic watch. It doesn't need to be this. And actually, I did want to comment, because I know a lot of parents get their kids Apple Watches. I think that's a lot better than getting your kid a full-fledged smartphone, but I personally don't love the idea of the Apple Watch, because I think, well, a couple of things. You actually can access the internet through the Apple Watch, through Siri. I mean, you can lock it down with the parental settings, but there's still workarounds. Kids are very clever. They can send themselves like links within messages. It's just Google it. There's a lot of ways around it. It's still distracting, and I'm curious about your thoughts on the teachers. If you have the watch, it's still distracting. You can put the Apple Watch in Do Not Disturb mode, but if the kid wants to get out of that, all they have to do is rotate the, they call it the ring, the crown, and then it comes out of Do Not Disturb mode during school. It's very expensive compared to those alternatives. And my child, I mean, she loses her analog watch all the time. I don't want to give her that. And then also, it just looks so cool. So I think it's almost like a gateway drug. I'm trying to get my own daughter to think of real life as being the cool thing. And maybe your stance on this is different, but for me, I'd rather not give her something really shiny and attractive so that she kind of thinks that the online world is really fun and cool and where she wants to be. I mean, when I look at that, I'm like, I'd get that rainbow one. I don't know. Looks like helium balloons.
I would not get the cat one.
No.
I know that.
I'm very allergic. So anyway, and then do you want me to keep going? I have more suggestions. Okay. I always ask myself, when you're thinking about the smartphone, ask if you're ready for your kid to have access to the entire internet. And if you're ready for the entire internet to have access to your child, because unless you go through a lot of effort to lock down the parental control stuff, that is essentially what we're doing. And that's where I'm like, wow, that really is, I hadn't thought about it that way.
So
But
can we pause here for
Yeah,
a
of
second?
course.
So I know that there's a slide that you have that's a PSA
Yeah.
around video gaming and some of the dangers and risks that are posed to that. Is that something that would be interesting to the group to talk about for a few minutes? Yeah. So
Okay.
So we think about what are some of the risks
Okay.
that are out there, and what are some of the perspectives on that and resources that you'd offer.
Chris is getting us into the hole of despair. I just want to know, or you don't know, it's his fault that's what's happening.
It's a short trip, though.
It's a short trip. No,
Just visiting.
There's a lot of risk. So I was curious about Roblox and games in particular, because that's not something, I mean, my daughter doesn't do much.
Do you know what Roblox is?
Yeah, so a video game a lot of kids, and particularly boys, play. I've never played it myself, so don't ask me for details on Roblox. But it's very popular, and it seems very innocent, as is the point I wanted to get across. And so I actually was giving a version of a talk to my daughter's school last May, and I thought, oh, wow, I should look into Roblox, because she was then in 3rd grade, so many of the kids were on Roblox. It did not take me long to find things like this. You can read, I won't read that one for you. But the things that kids have access to. And in my research, I then quickly stumbled upon this PSA from the New York FBI office that I have been showing to parents because I think it is a message that we really need to hear when it comes to multiplayer games or anything where our kids of any age are in a situation where strangers can chat with them. So this was a PSA that was made because this particular FBI agent encountered so many cases of what he's about to talk about that he felt the need to create a PSA and a website about it. So here we go.
It's not a game. This could be happening to your child as you watch this video. I'm Bill Sweeney. I head up the FBI in New York City, and I'm asking parents and guardians to pay attention to this. As soon as that instant message pops up on your child's browser or on their smartphone, there could be a sexual predator on the other end. It takes only a few days, sometimes just hours, to groom your child into sending compromising photos to the person on the other end of that chat. Then the threats begin. That predator starts to ask for photos of your child, something they would be ashamed of if anyone, including you, found out. Then they threaten to post them online if they don't keep sending more and more graphic photos. If you lock your doors at night to protect your family from an intruder, you should be locking down your computers. It's that simple. If you go to fbi.gov/itsnotagame, there are very specific ways to stop those predators from getting near your child. A moment of your time could save a lifetime of trauma for your child.
So that's something I was personally not aware of in terms of games, and it turns out it's not always just about, pedophiles trying to get pictures. There's also organized crime rings that are doing financial extortion in this way, where they'll get a kid to send one photo, and then they'll say, you need to send me money. And if you don't send me money, I'm going to share this photo with everyone. And according to the FBI, this has led to an alarming number of deaths by suicide. So it's very, very serious. And actually, just last week, I was down in DC doing a talk for a consortium of schools, and a man came up to me at the end of it, and he said he was a prosecutor in this type of case, and he said it's all day, every day. And he said, he was like, that part in your slide where you said we were going to get in the hole, and he's like, that's where I live every day. So it's really scary.
And again, just different affirmation of this. We had our kids were all in this weekend, and we have a son who lives in the DC area, works for a government contractor, and we were talking about this. I was sharing with him that it was pretty stunning to watch that PSA, not knowing what I was going to see.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how collegiately, when kids would play games online, that sort of thing would happen in terms of some of the attempts at extortion and everything else. So, I mean, there's it's far more proximate to us than I think we'd like to imagine. So. Yeah.
I mean, it actually really concerned me because I realized just my sister-in-law, her kids were kind of playing unfettered. I mean, I'm just worried this happened to her. It's just stuff you don't think about. It's exactly what that PSA says. I mean, the easiest thing to do, or the first step, is to just make sure that the multiplayer chat option is not available. But it is interesting, just video games in general, just a thought about video games, is it's interesting to reflect that it's very different now from how, at least when I was a kid. I mean, I wasn't a big video game player. I was playing Mario Brothers at my neighbor's house, where like the cartridge, the other side was Duck Hunt. It was very primitive. But it was just you and your friends playing. And so it actually was a social experience where you were using the game to bond and have fun with your friends, as opposed to sitting alone in your room. And I would say there's like a second level where you're alone in your room, but you are chatting with your actual friends. So you maybe are still having fun, even though you're not physically present. But then there's the third level where you're playing with strangers, and then you can have people who are approaching you in inappropriate ways. A couple other things I was not really aware of. Chris and I were saying, he wasn't either as much, but how easy it is to get drugs on these platforms. I had no idea. There was a thing by the Tech Transparency Project about an investigation about this, where they posed as teenagers and then basically saw how easy it was to get drugs and how quickly they were approached by drug dealers, even without them proactively doing anything to get drugs. And in this article, they talk about how it took more clicks to log out of Instagram than it did to find drugs on it. So I really wasn't aware of that. Then you have the whole elephant in the room of porn. This is Billie Eilish, the singer, and she's just talking about how she started watching graphic pornography at a very young age. She's talking to Howard Stern here. That she feels it really destroyed her brain, and that she was devastated she was exposed to so much porn. And she said in that same interview that she felt she, in her early relationships, had said yes to a lot of things that in retrospect she realizes were totally inappropriate. And it was, in her mind, the result of having seen this. Yeah, if your kid has a smartphone, they have access to the darkest pornography.
And just again, as a corollary to that, so there's some research that came out probably 2.5 years ago by Richard Reeves, who had been a fellow at the Brookings Institute. And he talked about the experience of boys and young men over the course of the last 25 and 30 years, and how boys and young men are failing at ever increasing rates in every area of academic, personal, social, and emotional health and well-being. And one of the things that Reeves pondered was how much have male relationships suffered as a result of the increased access to pornography, particularly over the last 25 years.
Right.
Interesting question.
And it's getting worse as a result of AI. So these are some articles just from the past year. Obviously, these are both about girls in terms of deep fakes and classmates making, fake videos and fake pictures of them, just using their faces and putting them on naked bodies and then spreading them. That's terrifying, and it's becoming worse. I think all schools need to be aware of that. But then, speaking of another thing, just last week in terms of boys and chatbots, there's now a new lawsuit, and the first of, I'm assuming, many, where this young man who was 14 years old became obsessed with this character he had made on character.ai, and it got darker and darker, and he ended up killing himself. And the mother is suing, in this case, character AI, potentially because they were responsible for her son's death. So this is a situation, going to what you're saying, where it's so much easier to just have a relationship with a chatbot. The chatbot is never going to make you feel dumb. The chatbot's never going to reject you. There's no awkwardness. So in all seriousness, I think it's so important for us to be able to be awkward and to interact with the person you're romantically interested in and just deal with those emotions that come with it. But this stuff is rolling out really, really quickly, where you can just pick, girls are doing it too, pick from a list of your virtual boyfriend or girlfriend and just spend time with them flirting online. I recently rewatched the movie Her. If anyone's seen that, I highly recommend rewatching that movie. It's from 2013 with Joaquin Phoenix, and it's about a man who falls in love with his operating system. It is so crazy how in 2013 when I first saw it, it felt so foreign and kind of ridiculous. And you watch it and you're like, this is like 6 months from now. So, but you did remind me of one thing, because I wanted to make sure to highlight a slide that I forgot about earlier in terms of the impact on young men in particular, because I was looking in Reddit, not a place I normally go, but there was a whole thread about people who were trying to spend less time on the internet, and it was of all ages. And there was this one that stood out to me. It has a few expletives, so I will skip those when I read this. But this is a 15-year-old. I'm 15 with no hobbies, interests, goals, or ambitions. All I do is waste time on my phone. Been feeling really good about my life because of how little I've done. I know I'm only 15, but seriously, I haven't done anything. All I do is watch YouTube in my room or talk to randoms on Discord. Speaking of which, I met this person on Discord who is into so much stuff, and it just makes me feel like I'm empty. I want to skateboard. I want to play an instrument. I want to learn chess. I want to do all sorts of things, but I never do. My screen time is damn near 11 hours daily, and I just feel like crying myself to sleep. How do I stop this crippling addiction I have with my phone? So, that really struck me, because it occurred to me that many times as parents, we feel like if we're restricting our kids' access to these things, that we're withholding a gift from them in some way, or we're withholding something from them, and we're hurting them because we're not letting them have access. And this really struck me as an example of a kid who had so much taken away from, I'm assuming, him because he had access to the internet, and he just feels like a shell of a person. I thought that was really powerful in terms of a motivation as a parent to stand strong and try to, maybe our kids won't be thankful immediately at all, but to stand strong and knowing that we don't want this to be the result, And it was actually really nice. I know that Reddit is often not a nice place to be, but the responses to this kid's comment were so thoughtful. It was actually quite moving, of all these people saying, you're only 15, you have the choice to change course. You can try those things. Don't be afraid to try those things. But I think that's an important point too, is that our kids are actually at this amazing stage of brain development where they're vulnerable in many ways, because they are at this very malleable state in terms of brain development, where the habits that they establish as teenagers are, in some cases, many cases, going to stick with them for life. So if they are taken advantage of by a tech company, that's not a good thing. But at the same time, they're also at this stage, and this is something I want to get across in this kid's book, where if they make decisions for themselves, they actually can choose what kind of brain they want to have for the rest of their lives. And by choose what kind of brain they want to have, I literally mean that the thoughts that we have in our heads and the habits we get into every day and the behaviors we repeat cause physical changes in our brains. So you can actually change the structure of your brain depending on how you choose to spend your time. And I think that that is both scary, but also really empowering. And teenagers, early adolescents are at the biggest stage of that.
It speaks to what the Facebook president, I forget his name,
Yeah, Sean Parker.
was referencing, right? And then it also speaks to what Jonathan Haidt comments on in terms of his research in the anxious generation, and that there is this moment, for those of us in schools that we have where we can actually positively impact, maybe even correct what did occur and allow, the right neural pathways to reestablish themselves.
Yeah, and
a
actually,
little bit.
that's a really good segue, because I was going to say one point I've heard John make a bunch is the idea that, because I got a little diverted when I was telling you to not give your kids smartphones and social media, and probably a lot of you are like, well, that's great. Where were you 5 years ago? That's super helpful. Thanks for that. But I wanted to say, for the people whose kids do have phones, some advice there. One is that if the school's phone free, that's a great first step, because you're already protecting 7-8 hours a day. That's wonderful. And the next step is, what can we do at home? So one option, I don't know if it's obvious or not, is that you could actually take back access. I would say trust your parental gut on this. If you think that a platform or a device is truly a problem for your kid, trust yourself on that and feel empowered to do what you think you need to do to keep your kid safe. And in some cases, that might actually be taking it back. And is that going to be hard? Yeah, it's going to be really hard, but that is our job as parents, to keep our kids safe. If you don't feel that it is at that point, there are things you can do to build more guardrails around your kids' tech use so you can protect more time of their day. I really want to emphasize, I do think one of the most important things is education of kids. So I think there's two, and I see like a young person back there who might be hating me for this entire thing. Hi. Yeah, nice to see you. Okay. But anyway, I want to say, I think it's really important that it's not just us adults being like telling kids that what they're doing is wrong and acting like they're dumb, because that's not the case at all. I think the issue is that all of us have been made to believe that technology is either benign or good for us or cool, and that you need to understand the degree to which we have all been manipulated by these companies who are making money off of it. And I think an important point is to think about cigarettes, where, anti-smoking ads, and I remember speaking to a psychologist about this, when they talk to teenagers about lung cancer, it's not really that effective because it seems so foreign and not really that relevant. But if you're like, hey, the cigarette companies think you're dumb, like they're trying to take advantage of you so they can hook you for life so they can make money off of you, that's a very different message. So I really want to emphasize trying to equalize the playing field a little bit and educate our kids, also asking them what they think about our own tech use. So actually have your son or your daughter reflect back to you, what do they feel like when you're on your phone, when you're around them? And I've asked groups of teenagers that. I've asked them, have you ever felt hurt as a result of your parents' phone use when you're around them? And every hand goes up. And I think we parents need to hear that, because we cannot tell our kids that they should be doing one thing and then we are ignoring them and actually harming the relationship in a really profound way. So I did want to give some practical
One of our
suggestions
seniors in the second week of school was walking in the hallway, as was I, and I think I was responding to some sort of really urgent request, like, are we going to go to Pepe's for lunch or the Italian Gardens, right, to meet an alumnus? And the young man just simply cleared his throat and said, "Phones away for the day, Mr. Post." Right. So my point is,
Yes.
I think there's really something. This is something that we're all working on together. I also want to reflect that a number in this room and in our community have said that because of the stance that we've taken as a school, it's emboldened them to say things like, yeah, the phone's going to plug in overnight in the kitchen and you'll get it in the morning, and we'll turn it back on for you. Many of you, you don't allow screens at the dinner table, right? Or at other times during the day. And I just want to affirm that that's good work that you're doing, and it's really important to do for your kids.
Yeah, it's very important. And I had a couple suggestions, but you just made me think of one thing, lest it seem like I'm up here acting like my relationship with technology is absolutely perfect. My dog barks at me when she sees me on the phone. Pets do that, and it's very funny. Now we just jokingly call my phone the rectangle when our dog's name is Tasha. If Tasha starts barking, my daughter will be like, "Well, it's the rectangle," and I'm like, "You know what? She's honest. She's right." Anyway, I did want to give you some suggestions for things you can do at home, some of which Chris just mentioned, and this is for everybody. Because the thing with smartphones is they just got into our lives without us ever thinking about what we wanted the etiquette to be. So I think it's really important for all of us to take a step back and ask ourselves, what do we want that relationship to look like? And I also should emphasize, I'm not anti-tech. I mean, the technology is an amazing tool. I don't think anyone would want to fully give up their smartphone. And as I can tell you later on, if you'd like, I just went a week without my smartphone because I lost it after that talk I gave in DC. Which I think was Mark Zuckerberg somehow getting revenge on me from afar. But so I literally just got my phone back yesterday. So I can tell you there were things I truly did miss. But I think that there are some etiquette practices that we all might want to consider for ourselves and our kids. So here are a couple of them. First is to establish family policies, because I don't think we've talked about them in many cases. And not just you as parents telling your kids how it's going to be, but actually asking your kids, what do they think the family policies should be? So you could try to get on the same page about what you are going to try, what habits you're going to try to keep as a family for you two. Communicate that policy to other families. So I think that there's a lot of, it's really awkward to think, if you have one standard for your kids and they're hanging out with other kids in your house, like, what are you going to do? I think we need to try to be bolder about communicating with other families. But I would say that I think a lot of other parents feel the way that whatever anxieties you're feeling, other parents are too. Just look around the room. It's just we haven't talked about it. But we do need to communicate with other families to get support. Like Chris was just saying, not having devices at meals, I think should be just the thing. Like, no devices at meals, but you too. So, I see a lot of people checking the sports scores at dinner and then wagging their finger at their kids, and we can't be doing that. Mealtime, I think, should be, or dinner time in particular, a time to connect. Not having devices in bedrooms is really important, both for kids and adults. For adults, your phone is interfering with your sleep. I know everyone right now is in a heightened state of anxiety anyway because of everything going on in the world. So, if you really think like doom scrolling before bed is helping you, I guess keep doing it. But I think for most people, it would probably be better to get your phone out of the bedroom. A lot of people, it's really interesting. A lot of people have told me that getting a standalone alarm clock has, quote, changed their life. Because if you think about it, most of us use our phones as the alarm clock, but you have to touch the phone. You have to touch the alarm clock to get the alarm to stop, which means that if your phone is your alarm clock, you're guaranteeing that's the first thing you're going to look at in the morning. And unless you've done a whole lot of work to turn off all your notifications, chances are you're going to get something on that home screen that's going to stress you out, whether it's news or email or just something. So get it out of your bedroom and get an alarm clock. Keep screens in public places in your house, no bedrooms. And also keep creating a bedtime for devices that's at least an hour before everybody else, just to give your brain a chance to wind down and also to recover from the blue light, which simulates daylight. So essentially, if you're staring at a screen right before bedtime, you're telling your brain it's daytime. So you're kind of giving yourself jet lag. So giving yourself a chance to wind down there. In general, the bigger the screen, the better, and keeping it in public places. So I don't know about your family, but in my family, it'd be a lot harder to watch like graphic pornography on a living room television than it would be on a tiny screen in your bedroom. So everyone has their own practices. The more basic, the better. So in terms of things like Kindles, for example, I still have a very old school Kindle, but I didn't fully realize like how sophisticated the latest Kindles are, where they're essentially iPads. But there actually are Paperwhite Kindles for adults and kids that just function as e-readers. So I still personally like reading books in print because I think our brains absorb the knowledge better when it has a physical place on a page. But if you like reading things digitally, you can, or your kid does, you can get a very basic one. And then also learning about and activating parental controls and schedules within particular apps, huge pain in the butt to set up, but absolutely essential. You have to take time to learn about those. I have links on that resource page to some guides, and just looking at them will give you a sense of how annoying it is, but we have to do that because there are some options you might not be aware of. And you might also want to consider third-party parental control plans and app blockers that are out there that can help you, again, hopefully with your kids' cooperation, establish schedules and just routines and access that makes sense and keeps the part that's useful or enjoyable, but gets rid of the parts that are threatening. Totally agnostic as to which ones you choose, but these are some of the options for third-party parental control plans. So a lot of cell service providers actually have them. So these are 3 of them, but look up your cell service provider, and it's normally about $10 extra a month. You can get the option to do things like set internet access schedules for the household, or actually block particular apps. That can be useful. And then a lot of parents like Bark and Canopy in particular. I'm, again, agnostic as to which one, but those are two of the most popular third-party services for parental controls and app blocking. And I guess parental controls also seems very top-down. I think there's a lot of cases in which kids themselves might want to have some time where they know that they're not reachable and actually might want to use some of these, in the same way that a lot of adults want to use some of the features available on teen accounts to reduce their own usage. And then there's a couple devices I wanted to call your attention to, because I actually think this can be a great solution if your kid already has a smartphone. These are two of them, the Brick and Unplug, spelled with a Q, which I find annoying. But I have both of them. I use the Brick more frequently, but basically the idea with both of them is that you pick a selection of apps that you want to have access to, and then I'll talk about the Brick specifically because I use it more. It's a little magnet, and when you swipe your phone over the Brick, it's kind of like when you pay for something using your phone as a credit card, and it vibrates a little bit, and then it'll say your phone is Brick, so you can see the difference in these two screens. So instead of getting a time limit, in this case it's an iPhone, of the sort where it just says, do you want to ignore the time limit and just keep doing what you were doing, it actually fully blocks you. And so that actually is really useful for adults. I know a lot of friends of mine have gotten one of these. I should also say at least right now, it's a one-time purchase with no subscription that works across, sorry, it works for an unlimited number of devices. I don't know if they're going to change that, but take advantage of it for right now. But what I also love about that is if your kid has a smartphone and you're like, okay, you want to take your phone with you to do something, but we only want you to access to, the phone messages, the camera, the maps, whatever. You can actually create a customized phone for yourself. I don't know why the Apple and Android are not offering this natively, but until they do, these are two suggestions. The unplug tag works basically the same. And I also wanted to call your attention to a resource guide from Dr. Becky. If anyone knows Dr. Becky, she's a psychologist who does a lot with kids, child psychologist, and she actually put together this pamphlet about setting boundaries with your kids, because I think that's something a lot of us as adults, as parents, struggle with, is how to set boundaries. And she actually provides some useful scripts for conversations around technology in particular. And her main point is that a parent's job is to set boundaries with your child to keep them safe, and a kid's job is to push back on those boundaries. And if you view interactions through that, it kind of becomes easier to know when to stand up. And so she just gives some useful scripts. Like I think the one on the right might be particularly useful after tonight, which is, I've learned some new things about blah, and I'm going to change the rules. And I know it's frustrating, but it's important for your safety. And I understand it feels annoying and it'll take time to get used to. Just some scripts that can help. So that is on the anxious generation. And I also linked to that on the resource page that I made. So those are some ideas. And then the last thing I was going to say on that is that it's interesting to see when our kids hate us for these things and then when they're grateful for it, even if they don't say it immediately. I did an experiment at my daughter's school. I did a week-long series of seminars with the technology director at her school, and had, among the other things we had the kids do, is we had them take a break from social media in particular for an entire weekend, boys and girls, everybody. And then we had them reflect on the experience, and we asked them what they felt JOMO about. JOMO is FOMO's benevolent alter ego. It's not the fear of missing out, it's the joy of missing out. And these were some of the things that they said that they felt that they had JOMO about, which I found really inspirational. So anyway, those are some practical suggestions of ways that I would start to create better boundaries for both yourselves and for your kids at home, and get their input on it as well.
So obviously a lot to absorb tonight, and we could certainly ask some more questions, but I wonder if there are questions that you might have that you'd like to ask Catherine. Yes?
First of all, thank you. This has been phenomenal. My kid was in a different independent school, and I'm wondering, particularly to Boys Latin, what was the most convincing piece of evidence that you found that made you all take a stance and make a change in your policy, and then what was the biggest argument that you received in backlash from the parents?
So interesting question. We've been talking about this for a while, in big and small configurations. In fact, I have a letter from a faculty member that goes back to 2016, advocating for hard limits on smartphones in school, which is just amazing to think about all the way back then. I think for me, it was an awareness of heights research, and that becoming so prominent. And in my own conversation with peers who were heads of school here in Baltimore, more broadly in Maryland, and then on a national level, how few of them were talking about it, that just sort of compelled me to go back to our team and say, yeah, I know we just assigned this as summer reading, but we're going to do some things. And actually, one of the things that was really important to us, and I hope my colleagues would agree, is that it wasn't just about removing phones for upper schoolers, right? That wasn't going to be the headline. It was Haidt's comment that we have underprotected our children in the artificial world and we've overprotected them in the natural world. And so there are no longer the usual consequences for being on a playground in an unstructured way, right? Supervised but unstructured, and having there be, for every action there is an equal and perhaps opposite reaction. And so team building, conflict resolution, all the rest, that's not happening in the way that it should. And a variety of other things. And so we spent over the course of the summer many admin team meetings looking at programming, again, not just around the question of phone access and usage in the upper school, but what do we do already really well as a school that's small by design, directly for boys, right? And how do we affirm those things, and how can we also augment them? And we talked about noise a little bit. I've said before that one of the happiest, if not most disruptive noises, I'm fortunate to live next door to school. And so the playground in the lower school is now open at 7:15, 7:30. So there's no sleeping in next door because kids are running out of the car to get to the playground, and it is this incredible, joyful noise. But you hear that in the dining room, and you hear it in the hallways, and you see it all across campus. I think we were bracing for some pushback from students. I guess there was enough, leaking of what we were planning back in the spring. Kids have said they weren't surprised at all. They, quote, knew this was coming. And our parent community has been nothing short of tremendous and supportive. And frankly, I think it affirms that we're really all in this together, standing shoulder to shoulder to do what's right for our boys in this moment. Thanks.
Yeah, and if I can add a couple things to that, I think it's really important, as you were just alluding to focus on that other side of the equation. It's not just about reducing screen time or reducing access, like these feelings of restriction. It's not restriction for restriction's sake. Part of it is to keep kids safe, but the other part is to make real life seem more appealing. And that's something that happened for me when I wrote How to Break Up with Your Phone, is that, breaking up with your phone doesn't mean dumping it. It means creating a healthier relationship with better boundaries. And I did that, and I started to spend less time on my phone. And it actually led to an existential moment where I realized I had, despite the fact that I try to be someone who's self-aware and someone who pursues interests and passions, I realized I'd kind of lost sight of what I wanted to do with my own leisure time without something to distract me on my phone. I was never really into social media, but just being distracted by the phone. And it led me to eventually write the other book, The Power of Fun, because I ended up signing up for a guitar class because I always have wanted to play guitar and I didn't know how to. And that led me to feel this euphoric feeling that I kind of embarrassingly late recognized as fun. And then I ended up writing a book about it because there's not much that's been done about fun. But the broader point is that pursuing this real life interest, just curiosity that led to signing up for a class, led to me meeting an entirely new community of people. I mean, yes, I learned how to play the guitar. That's great, but it was much more than that. I had this access to this real life group of adults who were just hanging out with each other to have fun together, which is really, I think, horrifyingly rare for all of us. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that that's how I want to be spending more of my time. That is what I think makes me feel alive, and I think what other people feel alive. And I'm sure that many people in this room feel similar to how I feel, where you feel overwhelmed much of the time and so busy and just kind of empty. Like, how are you so busy but empty at the same time? And for me, it really helped to find and prioritize offline activities. And I think that's a really important thing to model for our kids, but also to help them with. So I love the fact that it's not just about you can't use your phones in school. It's that the playground's open early. We have the really cool sounding playground where did you
Creativity corner.
Creativity corner. Yes, I think you called it a junkyard at some point.
No, I
the
did.
Creativity
corner.
No, I'm kidding. But just giving kids these things to do. I've spoken to people from other schools where it's like, okay, well, you took the phones out of homeroom, but put games in the room. Give them something to do, because you need to have something that helps people socialize. And there's a wonderful book and woman named Lenore Skenazy who wrote a book called Let Grow, who also collaborates with John, and she has something called the Let Grow experience that I want to share with you, which is a cool thing to do with your kids, which is basically ask your kids what's something that you're interested in trying or doing on your own, but you never have gotten to. And like, that sounds exciting to you and fun. And maybe it's a little bit risky, not risky in the sense that something horrible is going to happen, but just doing something new. And I've heard people actually assign this as a classroom assignment. It's like everyone's going to be assigned the Let Grow experience, and the kids get to figure out something. So for my daughter, for example, it was to take our dog for a walk around the block on her own. She's 9. And it was kind of scary, honestly. I live in urban Philadelphia, and I was raised by very protective parents in the 1980s in Manhattan, right after there was Aton Pates, and it was just all sorts of, milk cartons, all that stuff. But it's pretty cool to see what kids can do if we give them a little bit of freedom. The other thing I was going to say in terms of pushback from parents, I think the top thing I've heard is anxiety about emergencies in school, and that parents, even if it's not a school shooting or something truly horrible, there's a sense of anxiety of what if I can't reach my kid, or what if my kid can't reach me, and just for these everyday things. And I think I'm assuming you guys have a system where if it's an everyday logistical thing, parents can communicate.
We have many people who can answer the phone.
Answer the
Yes.
phone. I mean, I know my school
Respond
had
to
a bulletin
emails,
board.
all those sorts of things.
Yeah, and then there has been, I've found lots of statements from actual security professionals saying in a true school emergency, if you did have someone come into the building, for example, the last thing you want is for every kid to be on their phone, not paying attention to the teachers or the administrators, making noise, their phones going off, potentially jamming cell networks, spreading misinformation. You actually don't want that. So I think what I've heard and what I think is that it's a lot of parental anxiety, and that the first step there is for us to, as parents, to try to work on some of that. But I don't know if that's been your experience, if you had pushback about anxiety.
not really.
None. Okay.
No.
Well, okay. Boys Latin is fine. Well done, everybody.
No pit of despair here. Yes.
So what's your prediction for, I know you guys are well studied on this topic, what's your prediction for the next 5, 10 years? Is the genie out the bottle, is it feasible to kind of unwind, or is there hope to kind of get back to some sort of balance around this?
I used to think the genie was out of the bottle, and I would just feel very depressed all the time. Not all the time because I was playing guitar and having fun with my new friends. But the past 6 months have been amazing. And I would say I actually am optimistic. You can probably speak to your experience with other schools. But first of all, the fact that the community here embraced this so rapidly, I don't think that would have happened. As amazing as your community seems to be, I don't think it would have happened like 5 years ago, because people weren't thinking about it in this way. The number of schools that are going phone free is astonishing. That has exploded in the past 6 months. I actually asked the CEO of Yonder about that particularly. I was like, how's your business in the past 6 months? He's like, it is exponential, because so many schools are going phone free. So many state and local governments are actually passing laws and rules about kids and phones. I know that John Haidt, I mean, he has no time. Part of the reason I'm here speaking to you is he's got no time to talk to anybody, because he has been speaking to the Royals, for example, or, the FTC calling him. I mean, the amount of interest in this that is bubbled up is truly inspirational. There's a lot of work being done by legislators. I wanted to actually show you one example. Right now, the only law protecting our kids at all is something called COPPA, which I won't go through all these things, but it hasn't been updated since it actually passed in 1998 and has never been updated. We don't need to go through all this, but right now there's a new law that's being considered. It was passed by the Senate in a vote of 91-3. In July. Just think about when that possibly ever. I mean, I know people who are working.
Pretty common sense oriented, right?
It's very common sense oriented, but I know people who have been lobbyists in government who say they've never seen in their career something that has such bipartisan support. The tech companies do not want this to pass. They're really, really trying not to get it to pass. But I wanted to bring it up to you because it is very common sense protections for kids. And it actually does need more of us to speak up, though, because the big tech has spent, I think, a total of $30 million so far to lobby against it. And what I've heard from people who are in touch with representatives, they actually haven't heard from many constituents about it. So if you're up for it, there's a really great tool on this site that it will put you right in touch with your representative. It took me like 3 minutes to do it. And you basically you say, I'm a parent and I would like you to support the Senate version of this bill, because big tech is trying to water it down in ways that honestly do have some problems, and it's definitely not as strong. But that's a really big thing. Another thing that is being advocated for that I highly support and suggest that you do as well is the idea of having device-based age verification. So in other words, you could do something to your kid's phone or any phone and just indicate this is a child's phone. This is someone who's under 16 or 13. I mean, COPPA, the other one is for 13-year-olds. But that would mean that any tech company that was playing by the rules, at least, would not show your kid content or allow them access to things that are legally not supposed to be shown to kids under 13. The social media companies actually like that because they're hoping to put the responsibility on the phone makers. So ideally that part wouldn't happen, but that is gaining a lot of traction. So there's actually a lot of forward momentum that's happening right now. And for the first time, and also things like this. I mean, there's so many parents who are interested in this. There was a group of parents who spoke up in England about the idea of a phone-free childhood and more play, and it crashed their WhatsApp group because it quickly exceeded the number of people who would be on WhatsApp. And I think it was back in May. I've got a slide from back in May. It was 75,000 people, and it was like a month. So I would say that, like, look around. The people in the room are your allies on this, and so many. Anyway, I truly am optimistic that it's changing. And I'd also say, for example, Instagram or Meta just put out Instagram teen accounts, which, as I think I alluded to, if you do have a kid who's on Instagram, make sure you activate that. But they're actually creating common sense features on some of these apps that they should have done years ago, but they're finally doing it because there's finally enough public pressure on the companies to make some changes. So I am optimistic. And I think young people are waking up as well and are like, this is stupid. You're trying to take advantage of me, and I'm not going to let you do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to the story I shared about the young man who had 235 notifications every time that ding or distraction came through, right? He realized, and his classmates realized, and I think that we've seen in our community that the boys have been far more present and engaged with and to one another. I think there's a lot of reason to be hopeful and optimistic. I think we institutionally, if we had tried to go down this path in 2020, 2021, when we were all grappling with so many other things, parents would have looked at us like we had four heads. I think that because of that experience, though, we realized that it was too much and too invasive, and that's part of what compelled us to take this stand. So there's always hope. Absolutely. We probably have time for one more question, and then we'll stick around for whatever else you might like to ask. Any other questions? Yes.
Has any of your research been done on the neurodivergent brain? Because the impact of the devices on the neurodivergent brain is very different than a typical developing brain.
Yeah, so I won't claim to be an expert on this, but my own daughter does have ADHD, so it's something I've thought about a lot. And I'll speak to ADHD in particular. That's a type of brain that's going to be even more susceptible to getting sucked into these things because it's a condition where your impulse control and your executive function are not functioning in a neurotypical brain. So if you are the parent of a kid who is neurodivergent, it's something to really be aware of. In terms of kids with, on ASD, autism spectrum disorder, that I know that can be tricky if you have a kid who is actually using screens to cope, and I don't want to try to speak to that situation because I'm not an expert in it, but I would say for anyone who has any type of ADHD type stuff, just be particularly aware that the dopamine triggering tricks that are built into phones are going to be particularly effective with that kind of brain. Does that help?
Yeah. I was just wondering if you had any specific.
Yeah. It's something I think, so there's an organization called Bright and Quirky that I was invited to do a talk for at some point, and I think that they've been doing a lot about screens and kids who are bright and quirky. But yeah, it's something I think about in terms of my own daughter, where I'm like, oh no, this is, yeah. Although my own daughter now hands out copies of How to Break Up Their Phone to her babysitters, which is, I'm not very confrontational, and I came home one day and the cupboard was open and there was a chair in front of it, and I was thinking, what happened here? And then her young babysitter is like, your daughter just gave me a copy of How to Break Up With Your Phone. But then she said she actually
And she put my phone on timeout.
Yeah, exactly.
Any last questions? Join me in thanking Catherine Price.
I just want to thank all of you. I mean, I really, truly thank you for being here, and thank you for paying attention to this issue. I hope some of this was helpful. I'll throw up the slide that has that URL for you, but I really, the honor is truly mine to be here, and really appreciate it. Yeah.
We appreciate your time, and we look forward to reviewing your work in September.
Okay.
Oh.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks so much for joining
underneath
us,
there,
everybody.
yeah.